welcome to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer, and sponsored by the World Puja Network. And I'd like to thank the good people at the World Puja Network for hosting us here. And I'm joined today by Linda Willitts, who has worked with me and disclosureproject.org and CSETI for over 10 years, 12 years now. And we are going to be talking about an update on what is going on with worldwide disclosure and some of the issues surrounding making contact with other interstellar civilizations and what that means and how it can really happen. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Linda, for being here with us.
Oh, you're welcome. It's great to be here.
Well, one of the things I wanted to, we recently had a listener of this program sent an email asking about how they had heard that some of these extraterrestrial civilizations were quote unquote, bad or hostile or worrisome. And this is, of course, part of the mythology that is the stock and trade of retail, pop culture, UFO conferences and videos and mass media. And I want to analyze this a little bit, and if you can bear with me, it's going to be a very interesting deep intelligence analysis going back about 55 years. If you go to the Disclosure Project, or disclosureproject.org, and Disclosure Project's all one word, .org, you will see a whole lot of a very in-depth testimony and information, and some of it comes from people who had worked with the covert Star Wars initiative that was going on prior to Ronald Reagan's SDI, or Strategic Defense Initiative, and all the way back into the 50s and 60s. And we learned over the course of the last 18 years in the research we've done that they have launched a false flag operation of deliberate disinformation since 1953 that has been designed explicitly to affect policymakers, military personnel, and the public through the media to raise up a threat from outer space which does not exist. The reason for this is that if we are ever to have peace on this planet, the $1 trillion per year military-industrial complex wouldn't have anyone else to fight. So they have to have a boogeyman. And the boogeyman that they have been creating very subtly through disinformation, false cases, all kinds of spin through the UFO subculture, is that there is one or more hostile alien races that we have to, that are a threat that we have to defend against and fight. Of course, by raising this whole question, it hits all the hot buttons that humans have in their sort of primitive midbrain of fight or flight response to the unknown, the reaction that humans typically have to a different race or a different culture, or and this is, of course, the genesis of prejudice on the planet, is that there is a tendency that is tracked biologically and neurobiologically to self-preservation, to be wary of otherness and differentness. And this has been exploited, of course, by racists and by misogynists and people who have pitted one ethnic group over another, et cetera, and so on. And it can be used by demagogues of all types and stripes and colors, whether it's religious or an economic system or a political system or a tribe or a race, to amass a power and control the masses. The ultimate trump card, the ultimate card to play in that regard, would be able to create a worldwide military-oriented unified planet that is focused against a supposed hostile alien threat. And this has been part of a psychological warfare. Now, I'm quoting from a CIA document that's in our Disclosure Project materials, a psychological warfare use of the UFO subject. And we have a number of people on our team who have worked those programs and who have been involved with them for over many, many decades. And this is why when you go to say a UFO conference, or turn on the History Channel, or turn on anything that is in the movie Independence Day is a good example. What you see are these horrifying and terrifying images of alien races, and that there are good ones, which happen to look like Caucasians from Sweden or something, and then there are the bad ones who look funny. And if they're playing on this tendency humans have towards fear of the unknown and otherness, and towards tribalism and, frankly, racism. But they're trying to expand it into interplanetary racism. And this has been done through a very careful analysis and setting up social studies that they did back through the Rand Corporation and others way back in the 50s and 60s that concluded that there could be a great deal of power that would amass to this cabal of military and industrial interests that have been keeping this information secret by presenting a threat out there and hoaxing a threat. And that if they could do it quietly with some of our policymakers around the world in various world governments, they could get a lot of money for a covert weaponization of space to target these extraterrestrial vehicles and get a great deal of lucrative contracts for the contracting sector. For the masses of people, it's the beginning of a propaganda war of convincing people there's a threat when there is absolutely no evidence that there is one. So I think that, with that information, what you begin to do as you analyze and begin to deconstruct the last 55 years of UFO disinformation that's out there, is you find that there's only really one group that would continue to benefit from this kind of false flag event and false flag information, and that is the same folks who've been keeping this secret all along. And what you find, therefore, is that there are huge vested interests in creating another enemy that's out there, quote unquote, and to replace the enemies of various nations and various ethnic and tribal enmities and fights that have been going on for hundreds and thousands of years on this planet. And that this is part of what has been very carefully planned out over the years. Now, I want to remind the listeners that back in 1997, when we were doing briefings for members of Congress and for the Pentagon and White House on this, we had one of our top secret witnesses had been in a project that was an interagency council and coordinating committee that were going to use man-made anti-gravity craft, what were called alien reproduction vehicles, or ARVs, and also biological forms, things that look like aliens but are actually man-made, what are called programmed life forms, to stage an attack on the planet that would fool everyone. I mean, anyone who isn't really deep clearance on this would be completely tricked by this false flag operation, and that they had been testing it on the public for a number of years through what the public have heard and what's been come to be known as the abduction syndrome, which most people think is actually extraterrestrials abducting humans. What it actually is, it's alien reproduction vehicles using these man-made looking, these creatures that look alien, but they're not, and using a lot of chemical warfare as well as electromagnetic systems to make people unconscious or put them in an altered state of awareness and abduct them and make it look like it was ETs that did it. Now, I have met with more than a dozen different people who have been on the inside of those programs, who don't know each other, who have corroborated what I'm just saying. But what is not being reported out to the public is that this is all a big hoax, that about 90% of everything that deals with kind of pop culture or retail UFO studies is a type of disinformation designed to sow the seeds of fear. Now, a lot of people find this more bizarre, and it is often true that the truth is stranger than fiction. And this is one case where that is very, very much the case, because you have extraordinary technologies and biological developments that have been put into play over the last 50 years to lay the foundation of propaganda, and also not just amongst the masses and through the mainstream media, which is we're often shills or pimping for this cabal, but also some of our leaders, like Ronald Reagan, was completely deceived on this issue, as was President Gorbachev. And so there have been large programs that have been going on now for decades that have supported a militaristic approach to the extraterrestrial issue, because not that there is a threat out there, but because it's incredibly lucrative if they can convince people there is one, just like it was very lucrative to convince people there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq when it was well known that there were none, and that, but, you can, spend about $1 trillion on an unnecessary war if you can get enough people stampeding around like, frightened cattle, and stampede into something as foolish as the misadventure in Iraq. So I think that this is exactly what's being done, and the New Age community and the UFO subculture have been completely deceived on this, to the extent that the dominant paradigm out there is that there are good ETs and bad ETs, and the whole sort of false dialectic and this sort of cosmic duality, where it's, in my opinion, an anthropocentric projection of our own conflicts on Earth into space, because it fits with our own experience as humans, where we have tribalistically, attacked and murdered each other in endless wars and conflicts since the beginning of human history. So I think that this is something we have to be extremely careful of as we go into the future, and as we begin to entertain what kind of world are we going to have. Is it going to be this weird Orwellian and brave new world of manipulated information, where the psychology of fear becomes so virally contagious that people stampede into another something much worse than the Iraq War, but that would be interplanetary in nature? Or are we going to sit back, analyze the data carefully, and begin to ask the really hard questions, such as, who benefits from an us versus them, good alien, bad alien mythology? Who benefits from this kind of disinformation? Why would it be done? And when you look at it very carefully, you realize that there are vast and very powerful centralized groups that will benefit from a militaristic approach to an extraterrestrial presence. And this is, unfortunately, what Eisenhower lost control of in 1954 after he had a meeting with some of these extraterrestrial beings in the desert of California at Muroc, M-U-R-O-C, which is near Edwards Air Force Base now, in 1954. And by the way, that meeting has been confirmed to me by senior officials in a foreign government who have documents about it. And I think that what you have to understand is that there's about 55 years of lost history here, where we have been, as it were, developmentally arrested or delayed as a culture because of the secrecy around this issue, not just technologically, but also the fact that the people who have wanted to keep this secret have put out all kinds of false myths and frightening scenarios to the public through the media, through the UFO subculture, through the New Age community, of good and bad aliens that and invariably, if you really look at them carefully, the good ones always are kind of blonde-haired and pretty and look very Nordic, and the bad ones are always odd-looking and don't quite look like us. And this is the worst kind of interplanetary racism. And it's really amazing to me that people who otherwise would be rather progressive and enlightened on the equality between men and women, or going beyond racism and having a society where we view everyone for the value of their character rather than the color of their skin, as Martin Luther King said, these same people will immediately latch onto this type of interstellar racism, which is very worrisome. And it shows the extent to which we really have to consciously overcome these sort of prejudices.
Another really good, excellent resource on this subject is your book, Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, if people would like to read on it in more depth, because you really go into the one consciousness in the whole universe topic, and that, ETs, we and ETs are all one people.
Well, I think this is going to have to be, in a sense, this is a tremendous spiritual challenge of how do we go from people who are still fighting each other over what tribe we are, what religion we are, to being able to live not only peacefully with each other, but peacefully with civilizations that are going to be very, very different from humans because they evolved on different planets. And I think that to make that transition, there is a fundamental spiritual transformation that must happen, and that is the realization that all conscious beings in the universe are awake by virtue of this single light of mind, the one supreme consciousness within all of us, and that is the foundation for universal peace and for our being able to relate to these other civilizations. And this is what is a very key part of what we do with the CSETI programs and the training programs, where people are taught the meditation techniques. And we're on the World Puja Network, so we do a puja and we teach very advanced meditation techniques so that people can experience the state of samadhi and this oneness of consciousness, and then relate to these other civilizations by understanding that they are awake by virtue of the same universal light of awareness that allows all of us to be conscious. And this is really the key thing that we have to experience. And it's very important because it enables us to transcend all this negativity and propaganda that has been embedded and set off like a wildfire, like a virus, a very virulent viral program that goes through a computer network of fear and superstition on this issue. And I have to say, people will say, well, haven't there been victims of some of these abduction events? I say, there absolutely have been. But they're not being perpetrated by extraterrestrial life forms. It's being perpetrated by paramilitary and classified programs that are extremely human, using really advanced technologies. And I think that one of the things, we've spoken a great deal about the zero-point energy and the anti-gravity technologies that have been studied since the 1920s. The Kalski-Frost experiment, where in 1928 or 27 they were able to levitate this very heavy box with a piece of crystal in it that had the correct radio frequency bouncing off of it, where we have had free energy generators by accessing the quantum vacuum flux field of energy that's in space around us and the environment around us, so that we wouldn't need oil and gas. What we haven't talked about, and I'm going to talk about this for just a moment, if you'll bear with me, since I'm a medical doctor, and I have a daughter who just got her PhD from the #1 university in the world on this, in genetics and neuroscience, is that there have been within the classified programs a parallel development in the biological sciences that have been classified. And these include the ability to take genetic material and clone life. Now, everyone thinks that Dolly the sheep or whatever in Scotland back a few years ago was the first cloned higher life form or mammal. This is not true. It was being done in sort of paging Dr. Mingala, wild mad sciences programs way back, and for decades. And these programs, which have been centered in some of the underground bases in the United States and Australia and England and a few other places, have been using very advanced electronics to modify or to create artificial biological life forms, some of which have integrated circuits and computerized programs in their neural complex, including their central nervous system. And they have also developed radio frequency chips in the UFO subculture. These are called implants that are from the aliens. Well, they're not from the aliens, and they are implants, but I know where they're being manufactured, and they're very much being manufactured right here on Earth by a company that I'm quite aware of who they are. And so I think that the advances that have happened from the 40s until now that have been in the biological and in the electromagnetic realms, unless you have an ability to penetrate those programs, and the one fortunate thing about the Disclosure Project, and you can go to disclosureproject.org and see this, is that we have now over 500 top-secret military and corporate and intelligence witnesses who have been in these projects, who have given me documents and information and intelligence and corroborating data about this sort of thing. And I think that unless you study that, you really can't differentiate between, is something actually an extraterrestrial sighting or event, or is it man-made but looks a heck of a lot like an extraterrestrial event. I recently was with a major Hollywood filmmaker who had been approached by the CIA anyway, the CIA often approaches the big Hollywood guys as well as people in the media to do stories or to do certain movies that advance the agenda they want advanced. And he started looking into this subject. And what he found, he was actually out at one point in the mountains outside Salt Lake City, south of Salt Lake City, not far from Provo, Utah. And this was a few years ago. And he saw this, in broad daylight, this strange levitating bell-shaped or disc-shaped craft. But he said that it had rivets and seams and this and that, and it was very clunky. He knew immediately it was man-made, but it looked like an ET spacecraft. And if he hadn't seen it very up close, he would have thought it was, I saw a UFO. And he started sharing this with me. Now, this same film director had seen some years ago an actual extraterrestrial vehicle, which was very luminous, seamless, had an amazing energy and a very spiritual consciousness about it. And he could tell the difference immediately between this ARV, or alien reproduction vehicle, that's made by a consortium of companies that include Lockheed Martin and Northrop and EG&G and Raytheon and E-Systems and Science Applications International Corporation, et cetera, and the real extraterrestrial vehicles. But to a casual observer who wouldn't know that there are actual man-made things that look like flying saucers, they would be completely deceived. And so he and I started discussing this, and I said, well, yes, I'm glad that you at least have this level of understanding. Now do you understand also that there are biologicals that look like little ETs, that look like little grays, these little scary things, that look like an extraterrestrial but are man-made? And he had no idea. And I said, oh, well, here's a good recent case. In the last year, I believe it was last summer, there was a man who was a very nice man that I got to know named Stan Romanek, who is in Colorado. And his father had been in a top-secret Air Force compartment that I'm pretty sure was dealing with this issue. And he began to have some experiences that were really pretty scary. And he actually had an abduction-type experience happen in his home, and he was able to film this creature that he calls the grandpa creature, but it looks like one of these big-eyed, what people would consider a gray or what have you. And he passed out in the middle of trying to film this and then awakened, and he had had some kind of abduction thing happen that he recalled. Well, there were some people in the intelligence community who apparently had been friendly with his father or some kind of connection that were trying to warn him about all of this that was happening, that he was a guinea pig in a disinformation and propaganda program. And he got a call the next day, and I heard this personally, and I saw this film personally. And so did a long-standing member of our team, Ricky Butterfass in Denver, who was with me at this meeting. And the call said that was one of the fake ones. That was a fake one. And they tossed a chemical canister in your kitchen, and that's why you passed out. And there was a certain chemical that caused you to become unconscious. And he didn't know what any of that meant. And I said, well, the fake one they're referring to is this one you have on the camera that everyone who would see it would say, oh, my God, there's one of the grays. Or they could have one that would look like one of the reptilians. And I'm going, the fake ones just means those are the ones that are man-made, that are these PLS, program life forms. And there were all these UFO researchers, quote unquote, who were with him. None of them had ever heard this. I said, you're kidding. This is like UFO Studies 101. This is the first level. This is the first course you should learn if you're going to look into this, is the extent to which the intelligence community has mastered the ability to hoax this stuff to scare the bejeebies out of people. But none of them knew this. And I said, well, you really need to look at some of the work that was done in the 1980s, 20 years ago, by Martin Cannon. And Martin Cannon had assembled, and when I spoke to him back in the 90s, some over 2,000 references about the military, paramilitary involvement with human abductions so that it would look alien but isn't. Now, I'll give you another really great example, the Paul Benowitz affair, and you can Google this. And Paul Benowitz was a UFO researcher in New Mexico some years ago, and he was investigating an experience that a woman had had near Kirkland Air Force Base in Sandia out there near Albuquerque. And she had been driving wee hours of the morning and saw something she was not supposed to see, apparently an alien reproduction vehicle or man-made UFO that was coming in to that area very late at night. And she was stopped on a road near the base. Something was sprayed in her face. She was then, quote, abducted by, quote, unquote, aliens and then put back in her vehicle. Now, Paul Benowitz, when he started looking into this, was being fed a lot of disinformation by an AFOSI, that's Air Force Office of Special Investigations, officer named Richard Doty, D-O-T-Y. And I have documents, by the way, about this case. Now, Paul Benowitz thought that she had actually had an extraterrestrial encounter. What they had done is fake an extraterrestrial encounter because they wanted her to have that as the cover story to tell this UFO researcher so that she wouldn't relate the fact that she had seen a secret human anti-gravity flying disc. And that's what a lot of this is that they will make up those kind of stories as a cover story to hide the really top-secret Air Force and top-secret craft that are being made very much by humans. And so I don't know if I'm confusing people now, but you have to go through a level of education on this, and if you don't, you're going to be a sitting duck for the kind of propaganda that they're going to pour out through the public and use that propaganda to scare the hell out of people. I'll give you one more example. And this is a case where something wonderful was portrayed as something terrible. Years ago, and this is in Linda's home state of Arizona, there was a man named Travis Walton. Now, I don't know how many of you have heard of his case, and I know the man, and I've read his memoirs, but he was a lumberjack, and he was with some buddies one night driving in a forest up in, I believe, northern Arizona, and he saw this light in the woods, and they got closer, and there was this craft hovering in the woods. And he ran under to it and got, and the people were saying, come back, and apparently when an ET craft is fully materialized, they put out gigawatts of electrical power because they're drawing energy from this zero-point energy field, and between the dampness of the forest and the electricity from this craft, he accidentally got hit by an electrostatic discharge. It looked like a bolt of lightning, knocked him back quite a few feet. I suspect, as a trauma doctor myself, that it probably caused his heart to go into fibrillation, which means that it made his heart stop. And that often happens with lightning strikes and electrocutions. Any of you who've ever taken care of someone medically who've had a sort of a high voltage discharge. So he was taken on board this craft and then went out into space where it docked with a larger sort of mothership. And he was cared for and medically stabilized. And he, at one point, when he awakened and saw these ETs taking care of him, jumped up off of a table and took some instruments and tried to attack the ETs. He admits this. He was so freaked out. And so they had to restrain him. But after he calmed down later, and this was a 5-day period that he was on this ship, by the way, they let him come up to the central part of the craft and actually let him sit in the pilot's or the commander's seat and kind of steer it and fly this craft out in space. And it was just a beautiful experience of compassion where they saved his life and brought him back on the ship. And then they returned him near the town where he grew up or where his home was about 5 days later. Well, they made a movie some years ago, and many of you may have seen it, called Fire in the Sky. And it portrays a death ray from the craft hitting him, and then he was abducted, and then he was tortured with drills going into his eyes and into his brains on this ship. Everything it portrayed in that movie was false. Everything. And Hollywood took this guy's beautiful story of having been saved and resuscitated by the extraterrestrials and even being allowed to steer and fly the ship a little bit, and then being cared for and taken back after about 5 days, which is not atypical for watching someone after they've had an electrical shock like that. It was quite an accidental thing that happened, I'm convinced, from studying the case personally as a medical doctor and as a scientist. And yet what it was portrayed to the public through this horrible movie, Fire in the Sky, was that he was tortured and abducted by these horrible aliens. Nothing could be further from the truth. So what I tell people is that we have to be very careful, and I think rather skeptical of these terrifying images and stories that we hear, because you can have a wonderful story that's a real contact event like Travis Walton has, and have it spun by these spinmeisters and propaganda warfare experts into a horror story, or you can have a fake event like the Benowitz affair situation, where they use an abduction as a cover story because someone saw something they didn't want them to see. And so the big question becomes, what is really behind all of this? And it gets back to what we were talking about half an hour ago, and that is, who benefits from fear? Who benefits by creating an enemy when there is none? Now, this was in the last 2 weeks, I had a conversation with a lieutenant colonel who, a medical doctor friend of the project, connected me to him, had been working during the Carter and Reagan years on the Star Wars programs, the SDI programs. And he was at a meeting at the Pentagon where it was talking about one of the uses of the Star Wars programs was to have them in the event of a, quote, a alien threat and a threat from outer space. Exactly what Wernher von Braun warned us was going to be hoaxed back before he passed away, and he told this information to Dr. Carol Rosen. Well, this man confirmed this, and he said at the time the sense he got from this meeting was that the people talking about that knew there was no threat, but wanted to present that as a specter, as sort of a hoax scenario to convince people, particularly Ronald Reagan and his folks, to spend the untold numbers of billions of dollars on weaponizing space and on the SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative. And so this is the kind of manipulation that goes on. And it's not a small amount of money we're talking about. Between keeping the subject secret to protect the petrodollar, oil, gas, coal, and utility interests, and the $1 trillion a year military-industrial laboratory corporate complex, we're talking real money. I mean, we're talking real power. But more importantly, we're talking about geopolitical power, because by manipulating masses of people, both the political system and the people out there, they can create a lot of centralized power because of fear. Because when people are afraid, they give up their liberties and they give up their freedoms to feel secure, to have Big Brother watch out over them. So that's a big part of the psychology behind this. And what's so amazing to me, and sometimes disillusioning, is the extent to which people who would otherwise be rational and even intellectual will get involved with this subject, and they will immediately take this hook, line, and sinker, all this fear and all this disinformation without any discernment and with very, very little research. Recently, some of the people in the exopolitics, as it's called, field has started putting out this information that there's one of these bad alien races that have a secret treaty with the secret government where they made a deal to sell our women folk off and have genetic experiments in exchange for us getting their technology. Well, first of all, this is laughable, because the people who have seen, some of the people who come out of these secret programs who relate seeing these little creatures running around in underground bases, those aren't extraterrestrials. I call them aliens with quotes around them, meaning they're these man-made program life forms. But they wouldn't know that. A lot of people don't know this because they don't know of the compartmented operations. You have to cross all these compartments. And I was recently meeting with a CIA person in the Washington area and a Defense Intelligence Agency investigator on this issue. And they're so compartmentalized, and they have their own little domains that they have to stay in because of their security oaths, that even they don't know this stuff. And the lucky thing is for me is that because I'm a country doctor in Virginia who has taken no oaths for security, I don't answer to any national security entity. I've been able to cross all these compartments and put this case together. And when they saw the briefing materials that I had put together on this, their mouths dropped open. And even to the extent that I have a National Reconnaissance Office document which names the project code names, code numbers, and specific locations of these operating areas, these military operating centers. By the way, that is on our 2-hour DVD of the top secret witness testimonies that you can get at disclosureproject.org. And on that is a 550-page briefing document that has the document, this government document I just referred to, embedded within it. Very few people read it, but I'm pointing this out to listeners of the World Puja Network because I know that they're a very well-educated and astute audience. So I think that people have to understand that we have to transcend. It's sort of like that In Vogue song I like so much, "Free Your Mind," you know, and you have to free your mind of all of this stuff, because we have found that when we take a really hard look and go to source material and source witnesses, we find that 90+% of all the experiences and information that have been put out there is some type of psychological warfare propaganda to support this false flag operation. And what you find that's very interesting is that what we've had happen with CSETI is that we go out. Now, for 18 years, we've been going out all over the world and training people to make contact with the actual extraterrestrials. And we've had all these beautiful experiences. Nothing has been scary. No one has been harmed. They have just been so unbelievably cosmic consciousness, beautiful. And it's so different from what you hear and see if you go to a UFO conference or look at a cable TV show about aliens and UFOs. It's like 180 degrees opposite. And so it's this total disconnect. And I think it's time for us to speak very clearly of what's going on here. And I know that the truth is much stranger than the fiction, and people have their belief systems built up around this because whether you're new age, old age, what have you, it's really easy to buy into the good alien, bad alien thing because we are wired that way from our collective experience as humans. But you know what? That's the big challenge of the moment, is for us to transcend, as it were, the monkey mind and transcend these fears and go into a higher state of consciousness where we can discern not only the deception, this cosmic deception that is being washed like a tidal wave all over the world, but also look and find within ourselves this state of one consciousness, the unbounded universal mind within us that is shining within all of these civilizations, and discern the truth for ourselves. And when we do, what we're going to find is that any civilization capable of interstellar travel, there's nothing on Earth they need. They don't need to be here to get our sperm and eggs. They don't need to be here to get gold mined, like Zecharia Sitchin suggested in the book, his book, I forget the name of it.
There's been so many.
Help me here, Linda. Anyway.
I don't know. There's been too many of his books.
So, there are all these mythologies that are very xenophobic and buy into a certain mindset that are things that we have to learn to transcend and discern the truth, and then with courage learn how to make contact ourselves. Because here's the basic. You can sit around and sort of, excuse me for saying this, mentally masturbate all day about this stuff, reading other people's accounts. What I tell people, set all that aside. You can learn how to make contact with these visitors yourself. And when you do, if you have this discernment where you can discern the difference between an ARV and a PLF and a real ET craft and an ET being, and you're in this state of consciousness, it'll be so clear what the difference is. There's like night and day. There's no comparison. You're going to be able to see that these visitors who have been coming here for thousands of years, by the way, they have no malice towards Earth and her people. However, they're very concerned about the hostility humans have, and that as Neil Armstrong, who landed on the moon, my uncle designed the lunar module that took Neil Armstrong to the moon, and my uncle was the senior project engineer for that at Grumman. It was now Northrop Grumman, but that built the lunar module. And when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon the first time, and the first man on the moon, the crater around where we landed was crowded with these extraterrestrial vehicles. I have multiple witnesses to this. And Neil Armstrong told a member of our team that, yes, but we were warned off the moon. Why? Because we were going there as part of the arms race with the Soviet Union. We didn't go to the moon. The Apollo program was a highly militarized, competitive program where we weren't going out to the moon, or our plans to go to Mars were not as sort of a unified, peaceful world civilization. It was part of the military-industrial complex competition and a proxy for the Cold War. And that is the truth about the Apollo program. Everyone knows it. So I think that the ETs have made it very clear, the real ETs, that the entry ticket to being interplanetary ourselves is to begin to be civilized, to live together peacefully, to renounce weapons of mass destruction, to go out into space free of weapon systems and with this consciousness of universal peace. And then the universe is going to open its arms wide open. Until then, they're watching what's going on here very, very carefully. Why? Because within our classified programs, as Ben Rich, who was the head of Lockheed Skunk Works, told us before he passed away, and this is the guy, Kelly Johnson started the Skunk Works for Lockheed, and then, the Skunk Works are what built the U-2 and all these high-tech, but they have all these programs dealing with this super high-tech stuff like the alien reproduction vehicles and anti-gravity craft. And he said to us, he said, well, we already have the means to travel among the stars faster than the speed of light. And I knew that already. But that basically those are locked away in a black box, and it would take an act of God to benefit humanity. To which I said, well, it's time for us to be that act of God, because the human race needs this knowledge, but they need the truth that is the real truth and not this spun, fearsome nonsense. The other issue, of course, is that we're not going to be allowed to travel amongst the stars until we become a peaceful and evolved civilization, because I have been told that there are entire worlds out there that are at our level of technological development that they don't even have a word for war. They don't even have a concept of the kind of war and conflict we've had on this planet. And we would be a threat to them. So I turn this around. You know, when I'm meeting with these military folks in Washington and at the Pentagon, I say, look, I know you guys are trained to view anything as a potential threat, but let's turn this around a little bit. Here we are, a civilization. Now, my grandmother had horse and buggies in the late 1800s, and her son, my uncle, puts the first man on the moon. So in 100 years, we go from, because you live to be almost 100, we go from horse and buggies and, you know, rifles and whatnot to thermonuclear weapons and space travel. You know, this would have to be a big red flag coming up over this planet, because our technological development had surpassed our social and spiritual development as a people. I mean, there are individual exceptions, but as a civilization on Earth. And that is the big challenge of now. The big challenge of now is to socially and spiritually develop an understanding of these things and to vow to live together in peace and to go into space in peace. And then the whole cosmos will open for us. But until then, there's a quarantine around this planet, and it's appropriate because there are planets out there that have to be protected from us. So I tell people, ironically, while everyone's worrying about, you know, running around like Chicken Little, you know, with their heads cut off about, you know, the alien threat, I'm going, they're not the threat. We're the threat. Humans are the threat. We're the ones. You know, you can speculate all you want about what the alien agenda, quote unquote, might be, but let's just review the last 100 years of human behavior up until the present moment in Darfur, genocide, massive warfare, tens of millions of people killed in World War I and II, and never mind the other wars, thousands of hydrogen bombs and thermonuclear weapons that go through space, ICBMs, and then could land all over the world, turning the world into an uninhabitable cinder. And the beginnings of space travel, but in a way that has not been cooperative, and has been a proxy for the military. Now, you know, this is something which, unless you were brain dead and you were, you know, as an extraterrestrial people, you would be rather cautious, and rightly so. So I think we need to, as the old saying goes, take a hard look in the mirror before we start worrying about these other civilizations. I don't think there's a scintilla of evidence that they're hostile. And one thing I want to mention is that if you have the technological ability to travel through interstellar space, do you really think that there's anything on Earth that they would need to acquire? No. Because if you have that ability, you can materialize and dematerialize in various points in space and time. You can, from the elemental level of existence, the zero-point energy field, manifest any material or any substance. You could take one cell of a biological organism and develop it and clone it into a full organism. Even our classified programs already have that ability in genetics and neuroscience. So there's nothing here that they need. This idea that somehow they have to come here to Earth to get this is another mythology. It just doesn't pass the sniff test if you have any scientific understanding of what kinds of sciences would accompany the ability to go faster than the speed of light and travel amongst the stars. So then the question becomes, what is the phenomenon? It's a real phenomenon that people are describing when they describe these weird creatures and these abductions and mutilations and all this stuff. Well, it's not at all what people think. And I think people have to be extremely careful about this and educate themselves on what the covert human capabilities are that extend even into, we're going to get a little stranger here, into the electromagnetic frequencies that are interdimensional that tap into, shall I say, lower astral entities. Now, these are not extraterrestrial, but some would call them demonic, or some would call them astral, what have yous. But at Montauk and other places, experimentation has happened. And this is another whole area of confusion where people confuse these interdimensional weirdnesses with an extraterrestrial, interstellar people. And so what happens is that people throw all this junk together, all these different phenomena, plural, and call it the same thing. And the result is a lot of confusion. But that obfuscation and confusion and chaos in the paradigm has been injected deliberately by people who benefit from chaos and fear. And I think this is why people have to free themselves from that, take a step back, look at the materials we have put out there. You know, I've spent 18 years assembling the most astonishing government documents, insider witness testimony, all the experiences that we have had, and we put it out there at disclosureproject.org. And people need to become educated on that so they don't get fooled again, like the old song, we won't be fooled again. You know, we keep getting fooled. I mean, we were tricked into the weapons of mass destruction thing in Iraq. My concern is that people are so gullible and can so easily be frightened that we'll be tricked again into this interplanetary alien threat scenario, which is a complete hoax, an utter and complete hoax. And who benefits from that? The people who want to consolidate their own central power around a military global junta, or sort of ruling militaristic financial class that has everyone running around scared like we were after 9/11, and who can amass more and more centralized power. So I think people need to wake up to this, and it's time for childhood's end, and it's time for us to realize what the truth is.
Well, I can sure say that having spent approximately 45 weeks in the field with you at CSETI trainings alone, not counting other things that we've done, I've never seen anything that wasn't just amazing and absolutely delightful and spiritual. And you know, we've been talking about the evil ET or alien paradigm here, but what we've seen in the field are just the elevated levels of good ET behavior. I mean, up to the extent of God consciousness beings that we've had a lot of contact with lately. It's just amazing. And the interview that we did that's archived on December 26th about the Orion transmissions really goes into that a lot if people haven't heard that.
Exactly, and I think that's why people have to understand is that the actual interstellar civilizations that are here go from advanced and unified and peaceful all the way up to the level of supernal God consciousness civilizations that are they're material and they're from physical worlds and they have spacecraft, but their technologies and their consciousness are operating from that finest celestial level of evolution that's astonishing. And that's the level that we are often interfacing with, and a support role around us will be with other ET civilizations that are on the evolutionary path to there. And by the way, there is a centralized global universal order to this. It isn't as if these civilizations are allowed to run around the cosmos like the Wild West. I mean, even humans have the United Nations, never mind it's very dysfunctional. So I think in conclusion regarding what we want to share today is that people have an opportunity to choose how we respond to the cosmos and how we are in the cosmos. These visitors are here to help us and to understand us, and they're waiting. They're waiting for the human race to mature to a level of the first entry of what is considered mature world civilization, where we're living peacefully together. And we're there. We're getting very close. It doesn't seem that way sometimes. But I'm optimistic that that is exactly where we will end up. And these civilizations, which are highly organized and very conscious and rather enlightened, are standing ready to assist us as we make that transformation from the current period of division and confusion to a period of world peace and universal peace. And I think that in order for all of us to play a role in that, we have to be vigilant not to allow this viral contagion of disinformation and fear to grab a hold of us. Because one of the things we found is that when we go out into the stars together on these CSETI events, and by the way, we're going to have one coming up here at the end of April and early May on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. It's beautiful there. And then we're going to be again in Colorado in the San Luis Valley, where so much mysterious contact has happened. And then we'll be around Labor Day at Mount Shasta. And then in November, we're going to be out under the stars in Joshua Tree National Park, where we've had the Orion transmissions occur over and over again. And these are things that are open to the public. All of you can come. You can find out about them at cseti.org. That's cseti.org. And the materials for the Disclosure Project are at disclosureproject.org. And I think that what you find is that these experiences bring people together where they understand that the space within us, the pure conscious mind within us, and outer space are all one being, that we're all part of this huge, wonderful, infinite, quantum holographic universe that's awake. And the awareness within us is a gateway, a door to all these other civilizations and to communication. And then what happens around us when we're in the desert or out on the Outer Banks or wherever we happen to be doing this together as a group are the most wondrous and beautiful experiences. And we welcome people to learn to do that so that you can go back to wherever it is that you're living and form a contact team, because this is very much about citizens diplomacy until the United Nations and the governments of the world do something positive about this issue. We think it's very important that we, the people, learn to be ambassadors to the universe ourselves, and that's why we call our expedition and training program Ambassadors to the Universe, because each of us can be an ambassador in this higher state of consciousness where we do our pujas together and we go into deep conscious meditation together and we experience cosmic awareness, and then in that state begin to remote view distant worlds and the space around us and begin to invite these visitors to interact with us. And we have these interactions happen in 1,000 different ways that are all just magnificent and beautiful. And all of you are welcomed to do that or invited to do that. And I hope we will see some of you at these events soon.
I hope so, too. And even those of you just listening to these interviews are helping us to set up this morphogenic field to change the consciousness of the whole Earth.
Yes, and also on disclosureproject.org, you can go and we have a fax system that is free, that you can write a letter to President Barack Obama and to your members of Congress asking them to facilitate disclosure and peaceful contact on the ET issue. And go to disclosureproject.org right now and do that, because we are in the process of providing briefing materials to the new administration and to Congress, and we hope that something useful and positive can come out of the change that's happened in Washington, and that a new era can be ushered in of universal peace. So we need all of you to add your voices to that process, and I appreciate any support and help any of you can give us. Well, I think that's our time for today. Thank you, Linda, for being with us today, and I'd like to thank the folks at the World Puja Network for hosting us. And this has been Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer. Until next time, I hope all of you have a good day and will work for universal peace with us together.
Thank you.
Goodbye.